this is our final first Thursday of the fall. As I said, we'll keep going in the spring. Got a great lineup. I posted it out on the board right outside, so you can, got your phone, you can take a snapshot of it and keep it with you, and we'll put it out as well in the FOWL newsletter. But great things coming up. But before we get there, we got one more great hit coming with Phil Wilkinson today. If you're not a member of FOWL, our Friends of the Waccamaw Library, please join up. We got Becky Treadwell right here at the back, one of our devoted FOWL volunteers and officers who keep the organization running, and that organization keeps us running at the library. We have it's just a tremendous group of folks who make this program possible and so many other programs here, children's services, the teen services. We couldn't do it without them. So if you're not a member, please go see Becky afterwards and sign up. So today, very special guest. You may know him, Phil Wilkinson, as the Gator Man. In fact, earlier today when we were setting up, I had a couple of folks come up and say, is this the guy who talked a couple years before? And he gave this great talk, fascinating talk, all about alligators. He knows everything about alligators. This is him. He is the Gator Man. So he was the wildlife biologist for decades, I think 50 years plus, at the Yawkey Preserve out there, and he conducted studies of the alligators there, and so he knows all there is to know just about alligators. If Phil doesn't know it, you don't want to know it. So he is a great, just a great local treasure for us. And he's multi-talented. He's not just a wildlife biologist, but he also has a keen eye, a photographic eye, as we'll see today. He's a photographer, an artist, and while he was out there as a DNR worker, he was also taking photos, and he has beautiful photographs of the Santee Delta, where the Santee River comes into the sea. That wonderful, the wildlife and landscapes of the Santee River Delta, he's preserved those for us in these beautiful photographs. And he also has some stories to go along with that. So his tales and his images, we're here today to have Phil Wilkinson share those. And he's done this, you know, he'll give us this presentation, and that might whet our appetite for the wonderful book that Phil put together called, I gotta pick this up, kind of need two hands almost for this one. It's a coffee table book, but 7 days on the Santee Delta from Evening Post Books down in Charleston. They always do a wonderful job, but it is a stunning book, which I could open it up for you, but I'm holding this mic. Because you can have a look at it. Maybe we'll pass it around, but it's gorgeous. It's beautiful in images, in the stories that it tells about this preserve, a real treasure for us. And he co-wrote it with John Lane, who's a friend of the library here, the ecologist, the eco writer, John Lane, from up in Spartanburg, up in the upcountry of the state. But it's a wonderful collaboration, beautiful, and really something to take home with you. Great. It's a little big for a stocking stuffer, but you can put it under the tree. And there's some brochures on the back table there that can, you know, if you want more information about this great book, 7 Days on the Santee Delta, you can pick one of those up as you go. But without further ado from me, this is Phil Wilkinson, wonderful treasure, married to Libby Bernadine, wonderful poet as well. I should say, give Libby credit as well, another kind of treasure of the Waccamaw Neck area. who can't be with us today, but she's here in spirit. But please welcome Phil Wilkinson. Phil.
First, to start with, I'd like to say I don't know all there is to know about alligators. I've spent since my childhood investigating the lives of lots of wildlife, including alligators. And the more I know I don't know. The friend of mine, Pierre Manigault, initiated the idea of the book. He said, let's do a book. He's the head man of the Evening Post books and the Post and Courier newspaper. He's a friend of mine, and so we were chatting today, and he said, let's do a book. And I said, okay, what about? He said, let's do the Santee Delta. We're both real familiar with that, and you've got a lot of pictures of that. I know that. I've seen some of them. So John Lane and I joined hands to make the book happen. And the staff at Evening Post Books, especially John Burbridge, Gil Gary, and Michael Nolan, joined the team to bring the book to fruition. Thomas Rainwater, my friend and fellow researcher at the Yawkey Wildlife Center, did his best to see that we got things in the book right. Growing up on the Hopswee on the Santee Delta, I lived in a community of African American and whites that were a mixture of laborers, overseers, and plantation owners. Some of them still transitioning from an era of booming rice culture. I played, hunted, and felt fully accepted in the Santee community, and there were a few other than my family that helped push me along. As a young teenager at Hopswee, the Santee Delta was the perfect playing ground for a growing boy. My brother, who was much older than I, converted an old dory-style boat into a gaff-rigged sailboat, which we would sail down the North Santee River to the ocean at Cedar Island. We would catch the tide down to make the sailing easier, camp for the night on the beach, and catch the flood tide the next day back home. Our trip back home would often start in the late afternoon, resulting in the trip extending into the late evening setting sun. Those trips later inspired me to write a poem about our trips going home up the river. And the poem is entitled Santee Sundown on the River Home. Coming home up the river in last light, the wind dies, the river stills, smoothness disappears by the slightest touch. Long shadows fade into black as night clouds reflect light on soft underbellies, changing colors of red and yellow, like tongues of flame with smoke, turning to grays fringed in silver. Swirls of gold topped in white, mirrored in the river below. The sky turns to turquoise, deepens in shades of purple. Quickly, everything changes as the curtain falls on stillness. Moments occur without warning, though fleeting, linger long enough to cast a spell, when all creatures hurry as day ends before night begins. Coming home up the river, don't turn your head. Be open to its splendor. Though weary and ready to be home, you want to tarry in contentment, absorbed in a place of no thoughts, a moment experienced in any other way. Security comes from the moment, being a part of it. You belong, knowing the river leads generations, Seawees, Washos, Santees, Gullah Geechee peoples, rice planters, hunters, watermen, linked by time, by the river and the road home. At Hopswee, our nearest neighbor were an African-American family whose names to me were Daddy Ben and Miss Simmons. Her first name was Pinky. I never called her that. They were pretty old, but still self-sufficient, hunting and fishing, planting a garden, and gathering wood for cooking and heating. Daddy Ben took me under his wing to teach me to hunt and fish and help him gather wood for the cabin's fireplace. Sometimes later in my life, I wrote a poem that briefly describes my time with Daddy Ben, which I'd like to read now. And the title of the poem is just Daddy Ben. I see him in last light, shuffling down a moss-draped dirt road, lined with columns of live oaks that block the stars. A once powerful man headed home, leading his companion Jim, a not long for this world ox, back from the North Santee River for the last of a twice-a-day drink. The signs of their watering place still there after so many years. As they made their way back home to a cypress shingle two-room cabin with a centered fireplace, the only place for cooking inside. Daddy Ben and I ate by the warmth of that hearth many times. He gave me my first hound, one of two puppies he got from old Trixie. Diamond and Queen, he named them. He gave me Diamond, thought the male would be best for me. Together, that hound and I learned to hunt, were best friends in those twig-bending years. I was old enough to learn to track with a dog old enough to learn too. I figured Daddy Ben and I had many differences, him being dark and me light. I know now we didn't. We marked nearly 70 years apart in age. Not knowing his exact age, he gave me a hint by saying, I've been born the year Mr. Lincoln been assassinated, and a grown man the year of the Big Shake, which was in 1886. Our lives overlapped a span of over 150 years. Stories he told a long ago time about things like the Big Shake and how places in the land open up and the plow field roll like strong wind over big water, and he laid the big pine flat on the ground. He told of hearing political candidates at a stump meeting greet a crowd by saying, "Gentlemen." But when Governor Tillman stepped up saying, "I have come here to speak to you and can see what no two-eyed man can see. Ladies and gentlemen," Daddy Ben loved to tell that story because he too was a one-eyed man who could see a boy that needed guidance, patience, and friendship. Time has gone by now, and I'm about the age of Daddy Ben when we were friends. His old two-room shingle cabin is gone. Everything, the plowed fields, the road to where the cabin once stood, has turned to forest. A few times I've made my way back there just to remember and appreciate how much he is still a part of who I am. Shortly before I graduated from Auburn, Mr. Thomas G. Samworth donated his plantation, Darlington, to the then South Carolina Wildlife Department, with the condition that he would be allowed to live there until he and his wife passed. I worked there for 3.5 years, mostly rebuilding old rice fields that had been abandoned since the Civil War. We had photography and firearms marksmanship and other interests in common. Through our mutual interests, we became fast friends. While working at Darlington, I became acquainted with Mr. Yawkey, Thomas Yawkey, who was trying to do wildlife management on his own place on South Island Plantation. After getting to know him, I would run into him from time to time at Kinlaw Plantation, where he went to fish sometimes. This is not in the book, but it leads up to why things that are in the book, so I want to tell it anyway. Floyd Pavat was a warden, and I was going with him. He had a mission on Kinlaw that I don't remember what it was right now, but we ran into Mr. Yawkey and Baron Cooper fishing on the Kinlaw Creek Bridge. And we stopped and chatted with him a minute and see how his fishing was going and all that. And he said the fishing was good here until these garfish showed up. And Floyd looked over the edge there and told me to look too, and I did. He took his Colt 38 revolver out and handed it to me and said, take care of that problem for him. Floyd knew that I had been on an Army pistol team when I was in the service, and I spent a lot of time shooting with a firearm. So he was confident that I could deal with the problem. And I leaned over and popped the garfish in the head, and he floated off. And Mr. Yawkey looked at Mr. Cooper, did you see that? Cooper said, let's see if you can do that again. I got one over here. And I went over there and popped that one in the head and quickly gave Floyd his pistol back so I wouldn't have to make a mistake in the third time. And then we went on our way. But the next morning, before I woke up, Mr. Yawkey called me on the phone, and he said, how would you like to go to work for me and manage wildlife at my place? And I said, Mr. Yawkey, I have a job I really like, and the people I work with are fine folks, but I'll talk to Jim Webb, who is the director of the wildlife department, and see what he thinks about that idea. And we did get together very quickly and talked about meeting with Mr. Yawkey and talking things over. And when we got there, Jim Webb, being the wise man he was, worked out a system to whereby I would work for the wildlife department and they would contract me out to Mr. Yawkey's and his plantation, and all the funds would flow through the wildlife department, and then my share would come to me as a salary. And that was, those two garfish were a turning point in my life. The things that happened after that at South Island were phenomenal. For one thing, Mr. Yawkey had left his, in his will at that time, I was told that he was going to leave the place to the Fish and Wildlife Service with no money to operate with, just the plantation. But sometimes after I had gone to work there and had a lot of folks from the wildlife department come in and get to know Mr. Yawkey while they were helping me, he changed his will. He changed the will to give it to the South Carolina Wildlife Department with a trust, a fairly good-sized trust. It was $10 million at that time, which has grown greatly now. But those two garfish had a lot to do with that. Anyway, let's see. Now, hit another one, yeah. I can't see what's going on. Okay, yeah. After I moved to South Island, Mr. Sam was a regular visitor, but especially during holidays. After I'd been at South Island for about a year, Mr. Sam became sick and was hospitalized in the Georgetown Hospital. While he was sick, I would visit him daily at the hospital. Shortly, I noticed he wasn't doing or improving, and I asked Dr. Armstrong about it. He said, I think he's given up. He stopped eating and won't swallow his pills. I asked if I could bring him some of his favorite foods to see if I could persuade him to eat. Dr. Armstrong gave me the okay. Right away, I brought him some shad roe wrapped in bacon and broiled in the oven, put it in a styrofoam bucket with a lid on it, and hurried back to the hospital. I tapped on the door, cracked it open, and Mr. Sam said, who's there? I said, it's me. I brought you something to eat. What you got? And I went in and pulled the lid off of that thing and ran it under his nose. He says, he was a little bit profane at times. He said, damn, let me have some of that. And we sat there, and I ate one row, and he ate the other. And after that, I started bringing him a meal a day back, things that he really liked. And one day I ran into him in the hall, Dr. Armstrong in the hall, and he said, I think he's ready to go home. He's doing much better now that he's eating something. And he's taking his pills. And so I said, well, you know, if he goes home, he'll be alone. Maybe he should go home with me, and we could take care of him until he gets stronger. He said, well, if you can talk him into that, that'd be a great idea. So I went in and I said, Mr. Sam, Dr. Armstrong says it's time for you to go home. He said, I was afraid of that. And I said, how about you come home with me? We've got a good place for you to stay, and you can stay until you feel like you're stronger and ready to go home. He looked at me a minute and he said, help me get my clothes. and I took him home and got him settled in the south wing of the house, which used to be what was at that time my office. And it had 2 rooms and a bathroom and 2 closets, so he was very comfortable there. That eventually Mr. Sam became very interested in Loggerhead Turtles project. It was obvious to everyone that that was paying attention that the loggerhead population was in decline. This was attributed to their loss of habitat from real estate development on coastal beaches, and also the loss of adults and subadults to netting from primarily the shrimping and sturgeon fishery. And at that time, poaching of turtle eggs, which was economically valuable, was also a problem. The South Island Turtle Nesting Protection Project was patterned after the Turtle Project at Cape Romaine. It dealt with moving nests using various screening methods that allowed hatchlings to escape and do predator control at the same time. And of course, they were looking for evidence of poaching. Mr. Sam and Isaac worked long days. Go ahead. Mr. Sam kept daily logs on his results, which became valuable for loggerhead turtle researchers later. Okay. On South and Sand Island, he made his greatest contribution toward the elimination of crab and raccoon predation and loss of nests from flooding. Years later, Sally Murphy tackled the adult turtle losses from both shrimping and sturgeon fishery with significant resistance. That's right. After 2 years, Mr. Sam decided it was time for someone younger to take over the Turtle Project. In 1978, 8 years after Mr. Sam began the Turtle Project, the U.S. Department of Interior listed the loggerhead turtle as endangered. Money became available to find ways for the loggerhead to recover. New ideas and information evolved, and many of Mr. Sam's ideas were put into practice. Some of those ideas are still used today. The pioneering work of Mr. Sam's Loggerhead Project some 51 years ago on the Yawkey Wildlife Center is still an active program there today, where interns work there every summer from May until September on that Loggerhead Project. In chapter 1 of the book, written by John Lane, he describes the research project involving the capture of large male alligators for the purpose of attaching radio transmitters to transmit information to satellites that could be retrieved along the coast of South Carolina. The principal investigator was Abby Lawson, a PhD student at Clemson University, whose major professor was Thomas Rainwater, the principal member of the Yawkey Wildlife Alligator Research Team. The study was being conducted along the whole South Carolina coast. In South Carolina, both private and public alligator harvests are supposed to be managed to be sustainable. but the effects of the current harvest rates were uncertain, which is why the research was being conducted. Okay. The usual way of capturing alligators was by setting baited trip snares, walk-through snares, and throwing barbless weighted treble hooks, which may be thrown over an alligator and retrieved to skewer one of the barbs into the skin so that the alligator can be restrained until it can be more securely captured with a snare. Here we see Jackie, one of the Clemson interns of the Alligator Project, attempting to throw a barbless weighted treble hook over the back of what is hoped to be a large male. Once the alligator is captured, it should be brought to where it is safely rendered harmless while the animal itself is unharmed. First, the jaws must be secured, the hind legs secured, and finally, a damp towel draped over his eyes so it cannot see what's going on. Once restrained, the alligator should be moved to shade, even if the shade must be provided to prevent overheating. Okay. Once the animal has been determined to be the right sex and size, preparation must be made to install a matchbox-sized transmitter. Abby begins by rubbing the alligator's neck with a or hexadine rub and alcohol. She also uses a syringe to numb around the scutes and the neck plate. She uses a surgical knife to cut small incisions in front of and back of the armored bony plate that sits on top of the alligator's neck. She then takes a knitting needle-sized hollow metal rod and pushes it under the bony plate from back to just where it protrudes in front of the bony plate. When satisfied with this, first she pushes the other hollow tube under the bony plate on the other side of the head. The tubes inserted, she then inserts small stainless steel cables through the hollow tubes. Then the hollow tubes are pulled back out, leaving the cable inserted under the alligator's bony neck plate. The purpose of the cables is to hold the transmitter in place on top of the bony plate of the alligator's head. Her next step is to slather a mixture of epoxy on top of the bony plate to help secure the transmitter in place. And then she secures the transmitter with the earlier mentioned stainless steel cables. A final step is to spray the whole installation with black paint. For those of you who were a bit confused of the details of the capture and implementation of the transmitter, simply let us say the alligator was captured, safely secured, transmitter was installed, and it was later released where it was captured. You can see the dots up there which indicate locations at a given time that were transmitted to the satellite and then back to Abby's control station where she could map and time what everything was doing. Each alligator was done that way. The satellite movements record of one of the alligators captured at Alligator Plantation, shown on the map above, showed that it stayed where it was released about a week. Then it moved from the pond where it was captured into Minim Creek, then went down to the Intercoastal Waterway, where it then turned south and went to the North Santee River, then went east a short distance to an impoundment dike on Cedar Island, where it crawled over the dike into a canal that took it straight across Cedar Island, where it crossed another dike into the South Santee River. It then crossed the river into Charleston County and crossed another dike into Murphy Island, where it took several canals that took it to a small pond in the southeast corner of Murphy Island, a straight line distance of about 12 miles from where it started. The alligator took a fairly simple a fairly complicated route, but it used the shortest water course it could use. Once he started his trip, he didn't stop until he got where he was going. His trip seemed to be very purposeful. To us, the when, the way, and the destination was known, but the mystery to me was why he went. A second interesting example of the Alligators movements was one of John Lane and I came across during a trip to Santee Coastal Reserve to view wildlife. When we came upon a location at the southeastern portion of the Cape, the most southern location on the 20,000-acre reserve, this is where they were emptying water from a large impounded pond, which was congregating fish, crabs, and shrimp that were in turn attracting large numbers of birds and alligators that were feeding on the abundant congregation of food. Okay. As we were observing the feeding activity, we were surprised to see one of our instrumented alligators present and engaged in feeding. We weren't able to get the ID on the alligator, so we got a time and a GPS location for Abby to see which of her instrumented alligators was at this location by using information we gave her. She was able to track back based on its recorded coordinates to see where it started from and its travel path to where we found it. Abby found that it traveled using the shortest water route to the feeding location, a distance of 3 miles. In this case, we knew how and when he made the trip, and this time there was no mystery about why he made the trip. But as always, there was another question. How did he know to make the trip? Our final similar example was a large male that called home a small pond in the South Island yard. We tracked by satellite from the home pond 4 miles south using the most direct water route to a similar feeding congregation earlier described. He stayed 3 days and then returned using the same route home. His travels posed the same question, not the when or the how or the why, but how did he know to go? We've seen other examples of alligators going to distant sources of food that suddenly became available. To finish the alligator part of the story, I'd like to read a poem about one of my alligator acquaintances of 36 years, not a friend. He was easily recognized because he had a bony protuberance on the left side of his upper mandible. He was called Wart Nose because of the deformity. We first met in 1972 in a place on Cat Island called Hume Pond. He was the subject of several scientific studies on the Yawkey Wildlife Center over the years until he died in 2009 of natural causes. I wrote this poem shortly before Wart Nose died, and the poem's title is The Dance. Get where I can see it. In the black fire time during the dog days of summer, where the dewy grass on the levee meets the still black water, and day soon crawls over the marsh mist on this hot, heavy morning, we come together again to do a dance we've done before. Unblinking, we hold each other's gaze, one breath away. Your golden cerulean eyes, each pupil crossed with a dark, narrow line. I wonder how they see me. I wonder what they know. Gently, the snare is worked behind massive jaws. You don't seem to mind. Our eyes are locked. We both know we've done this dance before. There's the usual struggle, but nothing more. We've both grown old, living side by side. When I need you to tell me things I want to learn, I always know where to find you. Nearly half of our lifetime, we've done the same dance, and along the way, we've come to know either of us could do the other harm. Perhaps it's time for this to end. For me, it would be fine before one of us has to go if we could do this dance just one more time. That's the end of the thing, and I'm open to questions. Take my glasses off so I can see you. Anybody got a question? None. Oh, sorry.
Does the state have an estimate on the population?
Let me turn up my hearing aids.
You ready?
Okay.
Does the state have an estimate on the population of alligators in South Carolina?
I'm sorry, I didn't get all that. Could you tell me?
Does the state have an estimate of the number of alligators in South Carolina?
Right now, the number they used forever was ones we got back in the 70s. And we came up with a number of the total population through intensive surveys. Tom Murphy was the principal investigator in that particular project. I was involved in it too. And the Wildlife Department used that number for about 30 years, which was greatly changing. And we think that the alligator population is much improved as far as numbers are concerned, but they don't have a number. And that's why we're doing all these studies. And Abby Lawson was working on that. She's gotten her PhD and gone on from Clemson to other places. And there's one final part of her thesis, or dissertation actually, that she's still working on. But the number is not known. But, you know, the Wildlife Department is taking samples and here and there, and they are not worried about depleting the population right now because of the way they go about it, because they have limited control of harvest. But one of the concerns are that the harvest is directed towards the largest animals because people like to fulfill their ego and get a big animal. And those are the reproducers. Those are the big oak tree with a lot of acorns. In other words, those are the ones that are keeping the population going, and those are the ones that are being hit the hardest. So that problem is being looked at too. Does that answer your question?
Pretty much. I was also wondering, do we have a number at least on the harvest that occurs every year?
A number of what?
On the harvest?
Oh yeah, they have an exact number of that because each animal has to be tagged in order to be turned in or used in any way. Some of them use the skin, some of them use the skin and meat, and some of them just have the animal hung up and have their picture taken with a big grin on their face. I'm sorry I'm not able to hear well. It's a product of old age.
What was Tom Yawkey like to work for you?
He was a great mentor, actually. He had only one child, and it was an adopted daughter that didn't get along with his second wife at all. So I never saw her. But I think he took me under his wing as a sort of offspring type thing. And he was very kind to me in a lot of ways and made my life comfortable, and I felt like I was very productive while I was there. We were given credit by the Fish and Wildlife Service of wintering the most abundant population of waterfowl in South Carolina, winter after winter. And that was due to our management cooperation and his money. We did a lot of management for wildlife there, all species of wildlife, including, as you can see, the turtle and turkeys. We had people banging on the door to come and trap turkeys to restock the upper part of the state. We had a densely population of deer and other wildlife. So he was a great mentor. We had a lot of adventures together. He and Mr. Sam both were my late in life mentors.
Thank you.
Any other questions out there? Phil, I wanted to ask, why did you refer to Wartnose? That was a wonderful poem, by the way, and Libby Bernadine is his equal half. She's a highly accomplished poet. So,
I don't write much poetry, but every now and then I get inspired to do something and just sit down and write and then forget about it.
Yeah, you have many talents. So, but why did you you referred to Wartnose as not a friend, but an acquaintance?
Well, because we've known each other for 36 years, but we didn't ever become friends. We just became acquaintances.
There's still
very careful to make that distinction because, you know, I probably felt more friendship towards him than he felt towards me.
Yeah, there's a little distance there.
Yeah,
you need to respect that.
You had to give each other great respect.
Yes.
And that particular picture was not Wartnose because by the time that picture was taken, Wartnose was dead. That particular animal was about the same size as Wartnose, a male that was called Sunday Money. That was his name.
Wow. A couple more.
How many years were you on South Island?
12. I was there 1 year after Mr. Yawkey died, as arranged by the will, so that everything could be settled. And then I went into non-game and endangered species work, working with shorebirds and eagles and pelicans and stuff like that. Sea and shorebirds actually is what I worked on. And that was pretty much the rest of my career after South Island.
Excellent. And let's go in the back and then the front.
In the back.
Tom.
I was wondering, has anybody been hurt in the process of capturing, when he captured from the alligator?
Has anyone been injured in the process of capturing a gator?
Yeah, we've had several instances. I've never been injured in the United States by a crocodilian. I was bitten in South America once, but not too bad. And but the first time we had a situation was on Cat Island. Mark Spinks was working with me at the time, and we had Sudie Daves, who's now, I think, Sudie Daves Thompson in Horry County. She was an intern, and we had caught 12 animals that morning, and everybody was very weary. And Mark wound up with both of his hands caught like this in an alligator's mouth. He was trying to get around the whole thing, and they put it too short. And Sudie Days, I give credit, she jumped on the alligator and got control of him so he couldn't roll or move anything. And I got a tool out of a toolbox and pried his mouth open. And I said, Mark, when you feel relief, get out of there. And he felt relief and got out of there. And then we finished working up the animal and let him go. And then took Mark to the hospital to get, Mark was not there as important as the job, you know. And then we had another example. Lou Gillette was working with MUSC and us, and his son Matt was working with him. And he had a guest from Maine with a son along with him and a wife. And the son watched us work up several animals. And then we caught a rather small animal. She was about a 7.5 foot, 8 foot female that we had known for many years. And he jumped on top of the alligator like he'd seen it all done and he knew what to do, but he didn't. And Mark, the son of Lou Gillette, proceeded to move in and secure the jaw, and he wound up with both hands in the mouth because the guy didn't tuck in the bottom jaw. And then Lou, the father, jumped in to save the situation, and he got one hand in the mouth. So there was 3 hands in the mouth, and I turned around and went and got the same tool I did before and said, now when you feel relief, I was prizing against the inner side of the teeth across the jaw and prized up. I said, when you feel relief, get the hell out of there. And they all came out at the same time. Then I pulled it back out, and somebody knowing what they're doing, they got the hold. She was released too, and then they would take her to the hospital. It was a long way to go to get to the ferry, so we needed to finish what we were doing first. And then they weren't in any death throes. They were just pretty well crushed up. So yes, we have had some people, but it was always some kind of situation where somebody wasn't paying attention.
How did you know that Wartnose had died? Did you see his body?
Yeah,
or
we
did you
found
just-
him right after he died, and he was he obviously hadn't been in a fight or anything. He was just, you know, he had crawled up on the bank and just was there.
And how old do you think he was?
Pretty old. He, in 1972, this was in 2008 that he died. In 72, he was full grown, which means he was 35 years minimum. So you add all that up, and he's in his 70s.
Wow. And follow up. Did you find that, was he tamed at all after all that handling? Or
I have had the feeling, like with Wartnose and some of the others, there's a particular female that we call Big Bertha, that she was caught in first time in 1971, yeah. No, it was 81. And recently when we catch her, she just calms down. She knows she's got to go through this and get it over with, but she'll be all right. You can just tell that she knows that. I mean, I see her and she sees me and we look at each other. Sometimes I never bother her anymore because we've got all the information from her. She is the oldest known female alligator that's still nesting. She's in her late 70s and still having a very viable nest. We caught her this year. And at a nest. I mean, we didn't know whose nest it was, so we set a trap where the female comes in, and we had cameras on that trap design. It was one you crawl through and get caught. It's no trigger to it or anything. You just the alligator just sets the trap off by pushing through it. And she got up to it, looked at it. You saw her look at both sides. She pushed the uprights that hold the snare, and then she pushed the other one down. She knew what that was. That was something that would catch her. But she didn't get rid of the snare well enough, and her leg got caught in the snare. So we had a camera sequence of that capture, and she'd done that once before, so I feel sure she knew what the game was. And, you know, several of the males really calm down once they're caught because they know that's the best thing to do. If they don't struggle, we don't either.
One more question.
Sometimes we see alligators making their way into the ocean. Are they lost, or are they looking for a food source?
Most of the time those alligators are in the ocean. They've been following the shrimp boat, and the shrimp boat catches a lot of bycatch that they don't want, and they shovel it overboard. And it's already dead because it takes the time for them to sort it out from the shrimp they want. And so the alligators go out there and get behind those shrimp boats and get that free food, I call it. But they have to get out of that salt water pretty quickly because they are not adapted to salt water very well. They can tolerate it for a while. The bigger animals tolerate it longer than the small animals because it's mass mainly. But we had one that was doing that off of South Island several years ago. It was 13 foot, 2 inches long. Big male. And he stayed out there too long. He headed to the beach, but it was midday when he got to the beach, and the hot sun was just as lethal as the salt. So he wound up crawling down the beach a ways, trying to get to fresh water, and died.
It's my understanding that the state of South Carolina has a regulation that if you report an alligator in a pond in your neighborhood, and somebody must come to get it, that it's euthanized. And I was wondering if that's still the case, and there are other states that seem like, in Florida, for instance, where they catch it, they'll relocate it to a different area.
Yeah.
But South Carolina doesn't do that.
No, they don't do that. They used to do that. And Tom Murphy he and Johnny Coker did a wonderful study on that. They found that you had to take them over 100 miles or they would come back. They knew the way home. We had several instances of moving them, and they would find their way home and go back to where they came from. So moving them wasn't really an easy thing to do. There was a lot of variability in that. We had an example of a friend of mine that moved a saltwater crocodile from the Gulf of Carpentaria across Queensland and Australia, which was 100 kilometers, to the Pacific Ocean. And he put the crocodile in the Pacific Ocean there. And it stayed around for about 2 weeks till it got oriented. Then it went north around the Cape of York, straight back home, 1,500 kilometers. How did he know? That's what I want to know.
Yeah. Wow. Well, that's amazing, amazing stuff, and they're amazing creatures, and to have that, it's, yeah.
You know, they're looked at with disdain and whatever, but it's amazing. They've got a little brain, but they got all they want to know in it.
Can't always say that about us, you know, that's for sure. At least the second half, yeah. Well, thank you, Phil Wilkinson. He's got a big brain, and he shared a lot of those wonderful stories and memories and images with us. And please, you know, check out, if you enjoyed this, buy the book, and we have brochures in the back there to get the ordering information. But let's give a big round of applause. Thanks so much to Phil Wilkinson. And thank you all.